My name is Lisa Zook. I serve as the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives here at Chicago Theological Seminary, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here today. Before we get started, just a reminder to please keep your microphone muted unless you're speaking so that we're able to hear our speakers clearly. Also, we encourage you to use the chat feature to drop questions or comments in real time as we engage today. We do record these Wednesday gatherings each week. The recordings are available from the CTS homepage of our website. So after today's service, if you want to be able to share this with others who aren't able to be here, you absolutely can do that. It takes us a couple of days to transfer it from Zoom to our website. So look for it after Friday or so. I welcome everyone here. There are some familiar faces in the room, and it's always good to see you. It's also good to see some new faces, people who might be new to the CTS community or just joining for the first time. We actually have a virtual guest book. So if you're new to us, we invite you to sign that so that we can keep in touch with you. And my colleague Brendan will drop a link to that in the chat. Each week, we begin our time with words of gathering to help draw us into this space. And today, I am pleased to welcome Audrey Williams-Lee to invite us in. Audrey is a member of the CTS Board of Trustees, and I have the pleasure and privilege of working with Audrey in her role on the board advisory group to the Department of Strategic Initiatives. Audrey, it's a pleasure to welcome you here today.
Oh, Lisa, thank you. And hello, everyone. I'm very honored to be able to start our Words of Gathering today. And as I thought about what would be helpful to share, I thought a bit about my religious tradition and how I got to where I am. And growing up, my family was not particularly religious in terms of regular church attendance, but we were Christian. There was a clear belief about Christ. And when we did attend church, it was primarily Baptist because my family's from the South, and that's where my mom and grandmother had grown up. Around the age of 9, I started to attend a neighborhood church with a friend, and I soon became the most regular church attendee in my family. Yet I found that I struggled with how the faith was presented. At that time, it was mostly in what I would call the fire and brimstone tradition. And I looked for other churches and other resources. Towards my teen years, I attended a more conservative Christian church, and I liked the focus on learning the Bible. I liked the focus on a loving and merciful God. I rejected narrow views and a lack of acknowledgement of societal issues that were happening. So I spent a lot of my teens and 20s just trying different Christian traditions. I did Methodist, Lutheran, Presbyterian, AME, you name it. And what I discovered that what mattered most to me was an openness to questions and discussion. How do we apply what was taught to our lives, how our church community lived out their beliefs, and whether those beliefs were rooted in the love of Christ and embraced social justice. And so that's what's really driven me as I think about my faith tradition to this day. I will still attend different services and looking for ones that really connect with what's most important from my faith journey. To start today's gathering, I've selected an excerpt from The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman. And as you may recall, this was a poem she delivered at President Biden's inauguration. When I thought about our speaker today, societal injustices, and the work to be done, for me, Gorman's words tap into the perseverance as well as the hope that will drive us to realize change. And the passage I'm reading will be from towards the end of her poem. It goes, "We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and dutiful, will emerge honored but beautiful. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from our bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-lined hills of the West. We will rise from the windswept Northeast where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. When the day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, For there is always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to see it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your story, and thank you for sharing those inspiring words. I remember having goosebumps and tears in my eyes listening to them at the inauguration, and I had that same feeling come over me today. So certainly very inspiring and touching words, and very appropriate, I think, words as we get ready to welcome our featured speaker today. So friends, I'm so pleased to be able to introduce you to our speaker, Reverend Avalon Betts Gatston. Avalon is a Chicago native, a non-licensed attorney, an ordained minister, and a passionate advocate to dismantle, change, and build a legal system focused on human justice and harm reduction, not just punishment. Avalon made her public debut as an advocate at a young age when she convinced her fellow congressional pages to protest apartheid outside of the South African embassy in Washington, D.C. This passion against various societal injustices continued throughout her life and was extra charged and focused on the criminal legal system after she was wrongly convicted in 2015. As a minister of Christ, Avalon is also committed to using this experience to educate the church and the public writ large about the carceral system. These efforts have the twofold goal of dispelling the myths perpetuated by the carceral system and empowering the public, and especially the church, to be on the front lines of ushering in the much needed changes to create an anti-racist, anti-classist, anti-carceral, and anti-ableist system. Avalon received her bachelor's degree from DePaul University and her JD from John Marshall Law School in Chicago. She currently serves as a board member for the Community Renewal Society. She is chairperson for the Restoring Rights Committee for the board of the Community Renewal Society. She supports the McCormick Theological Seminary Solidarity Building Initiative as a community advisor. She is on the advisory board for the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, and volunteers with anti-carceral system advocacy groups locally, statewide, and nationally. Avalon is currently the project manager for the Illinois Alliance for Reentry Justice, convened by the Safer Foundation, and a member of the 2022 JLUSA Leading with Conviction cohort. We are so pleased to have her here today, and I'm so grateful for Dr. Christoph Ringer for making this introduction. Avalon, welcome.
Thank you so much. It is an honor and a privilege to be among my brothers and sisters in a faith. I always enjoy the opportunity to share my journey with my brothers and sisters. And so I just kind of want to talk about where I've been and how I've gotten to where I am today. So growing up, Sister Audrey's story is very similar to my own story. Grew up in the church, traditionally Baptist, because my grandparents from the South. That's just kind of what happens in our communities. And I too struggled with a God that seemed not just distant, but also angry, based on some of the teachings that I had been taught as a child. And so throughout my teen years and my young adult years, I just found myself wandering, trying to find a relationship with my Creator that was rooted in what I knew existed: love, grace, mercy. And so I did more than just attend other denominations. I actually tried other faiths, just to try to find that connectedness that I did not find in the church of my childhood. And as a young adult, I began to realize that I was in love with God, but I was unsure if God was in love with me. So I continued to search, and I found myself in a non-denominational congregation. And that is kind of where I found my voice and found my footing. It wasn't rooted to rituals, and rituals are fine. As an African American woman, I strongly embrace the culture, African culture, African traditions, and things like that. So I'm not anti-rituals, but it was more rooted in the relationship, the conversation, the development, everything that was coming to me was rooted in relationship. And that's when I fell deeper in love with God. And then the rug was literally pulled out from under my feet. Life was going good. I was developing this relationship. I was preaching. I was doing all of the things that I felt that I was called to do as a minister of God. And then I got this call that said, you have been indicted. And my world was completely rocked. Like, I didn't even understand. And as an attorney, as a practicing attorney at the time, I was like, oh, well, okay, don't freak out. Everything's going to be okay. The system works. It's going to, you'll be fine. You and your family will be fine. Be concerned, prepare yourself, plan, but don't freak out, because the system will vindicate you. You will receive vindication through the system. And so I went through that process, which lasted nearly 5 years. Just going through that whole thing. I took my case to trial and lost. And I was just like, wait, this can't happen. I'm a lawyer. I believe in this system. It has to be just, because if it is not just, and understanding that there are mistakes, which I thought were anomalies, right? But if it's not a just system, then what does that say about me as an officer of the court, right? Like, I was having that dialogue. And then what does that say about me as a person, a minister of Christ? Like, it was really challenging every part of my identity, to have the system fail me in such a huge, huge way that I just did not believe could happen. And so I found myself really struggling and spiraling into despair, deep depression, severe anxiety. And when I had to drive 11 hours to surrender to prison in West Virginia, in the United States, I just felt like I was leaving pieces of myself on that highway that I did not know if I was going to be able to recover from the hurt. And I was devastated, absolutely devastated. But in the midst of all of that pain and darkness and despair, I was introduced to mutual aid and to an unconditional love from the other women that were incarcerated with me. Like, they knew I was not going to make it if they had not been there for me. And they came and prayed with me, and they would just sit in my cube and not even say a word, just being present. They made sure that I ate. They made sure that I had shower shoes. And I know for people who are unfamiliar with what prison life is like, shower shoes is like gold. It's like frankincense, and it is gold, because you don't want to take a shower barefoot, right? Like with 150 other women. And so shower shoes are just, they only cost like $2, but you just treasure them because you want, it's a sign of your humanity, right? Like, I don't have to be put in this bad situation. And they gave me comfortable clothes. Otherwise I would have had to be in this horrible uniform that's actually men's clothes that they just give to women, because they don't make clothes for women in prison. They just give you men's clothing. So I would have had to spend 24 hours a day in men's clothing. And they gave me some comfortable clothes, some comfortable shoes, and they just loved on me. And they used their own funds to do that. And at the time, I didn't understand that as mutual aid. But after, and in hindsight, and when I started to really move on my journey to abolition, I realized, oh, wow, that was my first encounter with true mutual aid. And it was a loving environment. I was serving time with people who were convicted of manslaughter, who society would have deemed, who society has otherized, who society has deemed as unworthy, undeserving, and yet they loved me. And I'll share a story. There was a woman there. She was one that had been convicted of manslaughter, and she suffered from debilitating MS, where she was on a cane. She could barely walk. And I was in the throes of a very extreme anxiety attack. And when I experience these anxiety attacks, my body it shakes uncontrollably, and I become incapacitated in that way. But my brain is still functioning, observing. I can still hear. I'm still conscious, but my body I cannot control my body. And so she was across the room, and I was standing in the midst of the throes of this anxiety attack. And I could see her. I could not get to her, but I could see her struggling to get to me. And it took her probably about 5 minutes to get across the room to get to me. And when she got to me, she just embraced me and whispered in my ear, "You will be okay." And every time I share that story, this is a woman that was thrown away. Our system deemed her a violent person. And here she took 5 minutes struggling to walk, to get to me, to love on me. These are the people we have in our system. And we do a disservice to ourselves when we don't talk about who they really are and talk about the things that they do. And so I went into that place having watched CSI and LA Law and all of those cop stories, afraid of the women there, thinking, oh my goodness, these horrible things are going to happen to me at the hands of the women that I'm incarcerated with. And it was the exact opposite. I had, other than my family and friends, I had never experienced that type of agape love from complete strangers in my life. And I vowed that I would always speak their truth, always speak their truth. And then when I came home, I said, I had to understand, like, God, there's purpose in everything. You have predestined the plan for my life before the foundations of the world. So what is it that you want me to do with this information? Like, what is it that you want me to do with this experience? And I began to learn about abolition. I came home in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic, and I hit the ground running, volunteering, doing all kinds of stuff, just to kind of really start to do advocacy work. And I started to learn about abolition. And I was like, I just kept hearing and feeling the presence of God as I was learning more and more and more about abolition. Like, it was so aligned. It just, every time I would learn more about what the things that they were doing and the experiments that was happening, it just took me back to when Jesus was writing with his finger on the ground with the woman who was caught in the midst of adultery. And he said, you know, he made the statement, and I'm not going to repeat it, but, you know, he made that statement, but he ended it with, and I don't condemn you either. Right? Like, he knew that she had committed harm, right? Like, he recognized the harm that she committed, but he still centered her as his daughter, as his beloved in that process. And that's what abolition does, in my opinion. It centers that beloved person, that human being in the process. And it says, yes, you have committed harm, and we're going to have to do something about that. But I'm not going to punish you only as a result of that, that I'm going to love you through this to get you to healing and restoration. Every time Jesus healed, he healed to wholeness. And to me, that is what abolition is. Abolition is restoration and healing to wholeness, even those who have committed harm. And so my faith is what has rooted me and what has led me to abolition, along with my experience. The faces of those women are constantly in my consciousness, because I don't want to go back to the thought processes that I had before. When I say the veil was lifted from my eyes, I want to make sure I center them and their humanity and their belovedness in my work, in my thoughts, in my words, especially. And so my love for God informs my love for people and informs the reason why I'm an abolitionist to this day. And I'm a work in progress, as I'm a work in progress Christian, right? Like, I don't have it. I'm not perfected. My faith is not perfected. Neither is my walk. But every day I strive to be a symbol of who the Christ is to me, and who he and how we should exemplify that in society. So as a preacher, you know, I can talk for a long time. I don't want to talk for a long time, because I really want this to be an exchange of ideas and questions and thoughts and challenges and all of those things amongst us. So I wanted to just kind of turn it over to questions, comments, concerns, whatever it is that you guys would like to share. Go ahead, Brother Diego.
Assalamu alaikum. How do you pronounce your name? So just to be clear.
Avalon, just like the car, but I came first.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for sharing so much. You know, one of my brothers, he always says, when God wants to elevate your station in paradise, he puts you in the hands of your oppressors. If you look at Prophet Musa, he was put into the house of Pharaoh. If you look at Prophet Isa, well, they tried to crucify him, even though he was a prophet and the Messiah. One thing I always wanted to ask when I'm talking to abolitionists is this quote by Audre Lorde: "The master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house." And what was interesting about her, she was specifically talking about her intersectionality as a Black LGBT queer woman, who nevertheless was still gifted as a scholar. And then personally for me as a Black, Afro-Latino, Puerto Rican, or Moreno Muslim, I find myself in different worlds. And at first I was like, well, a master's tools can dismantle his master's home because master's tools built the house. And then I was realized, let's put that into context as far as for white supremacy. Capitalism is its regime. It's its mean cuisine. And I was realizing a lot of people are stuck into capitalism as a lot of people are stuck into sexism and racism and patriarchism and tribalism. So I'm trying to figure out what exactly can dismantle this physical materialistic world. And I really find that the answer has to be the spirituality. I say that because it's like, if you look at the Bible, look at any Bible, see what the author is. You know, it doesn't say Jesus. I have a King James Bible. I know who King James is, so I read the King James Bible because his stage name is William Shakespeare. Same thing with the Quran. The Quran doesn't say written by Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. It says translation by Yusuf Ali or so and so. So I really find out like things that are physical have limitations to its significance, influence. And in the Bible, it says in the beginning was the word was God, and God was the word. So I don't see how we lost touch of what the spirituality drives the religion. Now the religion drives the spirituality. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what is your envision of how not master's tools can dismantle his master's house? Because who really is the master? So thank you. That's a lot to say, you know. But
Wow,
it's just like a not a question, but just like a discussion. You know?
Well, thank you, Brother Diego, for that very layered question. And so and I want to answer it in a couple ways. And it's not really a question. I want to respond in a couple ways. So just from a practical standpoint, right? Like, so I'm just going to put my practical answer out first. As abolitionists, the goal is building, right? We understand that the current system, which has been around, right, forever, longer than those of us on this call have been living, right? So it has been around for a very long time, and dismantling it is going to take a long time to dismantle. But in the meantime, can we build something better? We can build alternatives. And there's a website called 1 Million Projects, which are little projects, local, hyper local projects that are working to build alternative systems. Alternative systems to 911, alternative systems when harm has been committed in the community. And so it's saying that, so from a practical standpoint, yeah, we're not going to be able to say, hey, let's just get rid of the criminal legal system right now, right? Or the carceral system right now. Like, we're all pragmatic and understand that that's just not it's not something that can happen right now. But in the meantime, we can build the things that we feel are regenerative, restorative, and healing in our communities on a community by community basis, right? And each community knows what they need. What they need. Like you have this intersectionality of, you know, being Afro-Latino and Islam and all of those things, right? Like how harm shows up in your space, right? And how you may respond to it is can be different, right? So each community is unique. It's like a fingerprint. And so you want to make sure that you are the solutions are coming from where the problems are. And see, our system has thought of these solutions from up on high, so to speak, right? And then pushing it down to the community level. And that's why you get this cookie cutter approach to harm in our communities and things like that. And it is not serving us well. That's the reality. But then to put the spiritual side, and so let me just add another piece to that. So Audre Lorde's comment about you can't use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house in the context of the practical, right? The how do we put this in practice it becomes true, because if I can't use mandatory minimum sentencing to dismantle the carceral system, right? Like I can't use punishment centered legislation, right? Like everything that any harm that's committed in our community, we're going to have a carceral response to it. I can't use that tool to dismantle the carceral system, right? But as you just so beautifully articulated, who is the real master? So when we shifted to the lens of spirituality, right? And recognize, as in the Christian faith, we battle not against flesh and blood, right? When we shifted there and shift the conversation and the thought processes there through an abolitionist lens, now we're saying, okay, what are my spiritual tools that I can use to dismantle the spiritual strongholds, right, that undergird the carceral system? And how do we fight it that way? And so I think that you have to be kind of walking and chewing gum at the same time, right? Like you have to operate in the practicum, and then we also have to operate in the spiritual. And we need to recognize who the master is in those two different realms, and what their tools are in those two different realms, and apply the proper rules and principles, so to speak, depending upon where you're operating. So I think that both are true, and that just requires a different level of thinking, consciousness, and action.
Thank you. And then as the Bible says, you cannot serve two masters because you hate one and love the other. So thank you. It's like that was a confirmation of what I was feeling. So thank you.
I think, Marco, you had your hand up next.
Yes. Unfortunately, I was locked up in a Florida jail for 3 days, and I had no criminal record. Never been through any experience like that. I had family members who had dealt with incarceration and things of that nature. I grew up in the projects in Chicago, and I spent all my life trying to fulfill a promise to not disappoint my grandmother and to follow in the footsteps that some of my cousins had followed in. And so I remember at 12 years old, I was playing basketball, a school window was open, and we went in the school lollygagging as kids, just running around. We went to the gym and played basketball. Someone saw us go into that window, called the police, and put us in squad cars. Now I'm thinking that we're kids, so we didn't do anything but go in there and just play basketball. We didn't damage anything or anything. We were just playing around. So they drive us up the street to Ida B. Wells Projects, where I was from. And they say, "Miss Marbella, your grandson in the squad car." And so they ran and got my grandmother. I had my grandmother at 51st Street Police Station till about 2 a.m. before they released me. And I promised I'll never be in a situation like that again. And then I found myself at the age of 35 fighting the case because I got into a relationship with a young lady. Well, actually it wasn't a relationship. She wanted to be in a relationship. She went to police and just kind of did some spiteful things. And I found myself in court. And I also found myself sitting down with detectives, and they couldn't even spell the stuff that they were putting in the affidavit. I'm like, man, they could be police officers and can't even spell. They can destroy my life and can't even spell. So I found out how easy it is to destroy a Black life. Also, I was a minister on 65th with Pastor Corey Brooks, and I was leaving church, and the police pulled me over. And they said they pulled me over because I had a hoodie on. And they said, now it was raining, so yeah, I had my hoodie on. But they also said that I was in a high crime area. Now, I find that in these situations, when that situation happened, my pastor disowned me. For their 100-year anniversary, I did everything. And it was so quick for them to disown me. Because, you know, he felt that it could fall back on him. I find that many church circles feel that Christians don't go through these struggles, you know, as far as racial equity and inclusion, as far as being racially profiled, as far as being a Black minister in the church. You're still a Black man, and you can lead that church, be profiled, and find yourself in the same situation as everyone else. And so what can we do as a church? Because I really feel that many churches are behind because they feel that these things do not happen to Christians. So what would you say to that, Ms. Avalon?
So coming from it has to be education, right? Like, so I want to say this. The response that you received is learned behavior, right? Like, they were taught this thing. And our church, unfortunately, you know, we go to church and then we come home and we see the news and we read the newspapers and we see everything else around us that talks about, that otherizes people, right? And there's no counterbalance to that within the discussions that's happening about in within the church, right? And I mean, the church is in the building, but the church is in the church itself. And so what happens is you get, if you think about it from a proportion perspective, the amount of time you spend in church versus the amount of time you're being fed information from other sources, right? That secondary thing, the latter, consumes the vast majority of your time. And so there is nothing within the church to offset that. There, and because it's hard conversations, right? Like, it's really hard conversations when we really have to kind of peel back the veil and say, oh, that's some ugly stuff going on right there. Those are hard things to talk about. And when we're talking about, you know, the history of it and colonization and all of those things, when we start to really think about how the roots of all of those ills that are plaguing us today show up in just plain spaces, and we're unconscious to it because there's no counterbalance. And that's, to me, the challenge to the church, right? Is to be that counterbalance, to be the voice that says, wait a minute, Christ forgave people on the cross with him. And he said to that young man, this day you will be with me in paradise. He didn't say, you know, after you go through atonement, or he said this day, right? Like, so how do we emulate that? And how do we make sure that we're offsetting the messages that we're receiving, the subliminal messages, and sometimes not subliminal, that we're receiving, to actually get us back rooted into, no, this is not really how we should be treating each other, period, right? And that the church has a role, because unfortunately the church played a role in perpetuating these myths. It has a duty to undo those same harms. So education is first and foremost, but the leaders of the church gotta get with the program. Like, that's what has to happen. If the leaders don't lead in that way, then no one's gonna follow.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. Marva? You gotta unmute.
I'm sorry. Good morning, everyone. It is a joy to be with all of you today and to learn of your stories. We all have stories, and mine is long, and I'm not going to dwell on it. But I just don't understand how we can't get it. I don't understand how the church and philosophy and theology, all this we learn, and we don't get it that the first two laws that God gives us is to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and then to love your neighbor as yourself. That is just so basic and so simple. And I just don't understand why we don't get it. But let me move on to why I have a question for you. Is it Reverend Gatston?
Or you just call me Avalon. I'm not formal.
Okay, Avalon. I loved Mandela and celebrated when he got out of prison, after 27 years. And I've been to his home and I went to his jail cell. I just loved Mandela. And I think he believed that God is love and to love your neighbors. I mean, he was just, and the place he came from, his village was so small and remote, but yet he loved people and he did so much in this world. And so I missed part of your story where I think you said you were working against apartheid. And I wasn't sure what you got, why you had to go to prison. I don't understand that. And how long did you serve?
So I was 15 years old when I was protesting apartheid in South Africa. I was selected to be a United States congressional page. They had this program at the time where you would go and spend a school year in DC, and you would like when back in the day you could see like young people sitting in the well of the Senate and the House. Those were congressional pages, and we would do errands and just kind of learn about government and things like that. And you had to go through this whole like selection process and things like that. And so while I was there, I was one of the youngest people there at the time. And it was interesting because I was learning about it and I was like, wait a minute, this is wrong. But I've always been that person to kind of stand up for the person, the people, the outsiders, right? Like when I see an injustice, I've always been that person to kind of speak up. I got a big mouth in that way. And that has served me well in some spaces and not well in other spaces. And so when I was 15, I just felt like we, as congressional pages, we had some power, right? Like we were congressional pages and we should use that power and that in a way to actually amplify the fact that this needed to stop. And so it's interesting because we went out there and we were picketing the South African embassy with other adults. There were some other adults out there as well that we didn't know. The police knew who we were and like rounded us up and was like, y'all cannot be out here. Took us to the station and then called all of our parents. And so we did not get arrested. You could say we were detained, but our privilege of being congressional pages definitely paid off. And it just so happened when I served as a congressional page, Speaker, what is his name? I can't even think of his name, but the grandson of the Speaker of the House was a page with me. And he was out there. So they kind of just like called our parents on us and was like, and my mom, she told me, she says, honey, I know this is who you are. She said, but I'm in Chicago, you're in DC. I need you to write a paper. I need you to do something else and not be arrested or with the police about that. And so so that was my first very public action in organizing and things like that. Now, with regards to my conviction, I was well an adult. I was a practicing lawyer at the time, and my conviction was a result of retribution. I had reported discrimination, and some illegal and unethical behavior that was taking place within a state agency. And come to find out that the people who were participating in that misconduct were former prosecutors, and they recommended me for prosecution. They called their friends and had me prosecuted. And so, which is why I was innocent. I fought my case all the way up to the US Supreme Court in trying to establish my innocence. But I served about 4 years in prison, and I came home in 2020. So
just for writing that piece?
no, this is because I basically bucked the system. I called out racism and discrimination in the system and some illegal behavior. And those people had power. They had friends who had power, and they decided that they were going to teach me a lesson.
Terrible. I'm sorry for that, but you are a spark in what needs to be done now, and you are helping in that way. So thank you for your story.
Thank you. Brother Diego?
It's tragedy, freedom fighters. Nobody would fight for the freedom, everybody was freed. I wanted to reflect about the ongoing struggle for emancipation since the Emancipation Proclamation, which really wasn't an Emancipation Proclamation until Juneteenth. Because how could people be freed if there were still slaves on plantations? But nevertheless, I wanted to ask, in this, I know your story really relates to Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. And then Luha Benjamin put out Grace After Technology, which is the new Jim Code, which is really more scarier because of mass surveillance. So I'm trying to figure out, what is the new method of emancipation if we're fighting technology? If you look at Target, if you look at Walmart, it's autonomous cashiers. If you look at Uber, if you look at Lyft, it's autonomous driving. If you look at Amazon, they try to do autonomous buying. So it's like the Matrix. It really is the Matrix. And I'm trying to figure out how is it possible that each generation has the urge to fight, but it's like the more we use these tools, the more we're webbed into this conglomerate that's gonna oppress us, because it's like, Alexa spies on you, Google spies on you, Mark Zuckerberg definitely spies on you. I mean, he just had to fight Supreme Court system. I recently just found out that the Matrix was the metaverse. The metaverse was the Matrix. It was just, I'm just surprised. It's like, it doesn't seem like, and then it's the police system. So if the technology doesn't get you, then the police will get you.
Well, but they are one and the same.
They're one and
right?
the same, exactly.
Because they report to the police, right? Like, so all those ring doorbells, all of those things that we have been and I'm not saying that technology is bad. Like, I got a smartphone. I use technology, but we have to recognize it for what it is, right? Like, we have to understand that this technology the technology itself, to a certain extent, is benign. It's how it is used, which becomes the problem, right? So we have to understand, we need to be in those spaces, like conscious people who are conscious to what the fight is really about, need to be in those spaces, and we're not. We need to be at those tables, and we're not. We need to be the ones inventing and creating, and we're not. And that is really where the problem is. And I think that's, to me, is where the church comes in, right? Because I remember hearing sermons about how, and the word in the Bible, from a Christian perspective, the Bible says that do your work unto God, right? And so if the church is challenged, no matter what faith it is, if the church is challenged to show up in those spaces, in it's in its true principles, right? That it has to have an impact on what's going on. But what has happened is that the principles, the true core principles of all of the major faiths have been co-opted by other things. And so we find ourselves in this situation where the church is kind of a bystander to what's happening. And I believe in separation of church and state, don't get me wrong, as far as that kind of stuff, but I feel like the church has a role to play in really kind of guiding us to a place of what I love to use is the beloved community that Dr. Martin Luther King talked about. That is the goal. That is the goal that I want for my children and my children's children and my children's children's children and anybody else's kids, family, aunts, uncle, brothers, whatever the case may be. I want the beloved community for all of us. And we have work to do to get there. And I think that the church kind of being on the sidelines in that fight is a problem.
Not just the church, but also the mosque as well.
Well, and when I say church, I mean, that's what I mean. I mean, as in the generic term of church, not just the Christian faith. I wanted to get to Karen's question before I come to you, Marco. I wanted to get to Karen's question. I know we're running out of time about the retired police officers that weren't support in support of racial profiling. They are in, especially in the network that I'm in, there are former police officers that are doing this work, that are really trying to sound the alarm about the culture that's within the system. It is so funny because I have a very, very close, he's like a brother to me, he's a cousin, but a very, very close family member that is a police officer. And I tell, they're like, well, how were you for, abolition, and you have this beloved family member that's a part of the system? And I said, I don't hate police officers. I don't hate anybody. But I think that the system is a problem. We have good officers, but they're good officers in a bad system. And so ultimately, what good can they really truly serve when the system itself is rotten? And so that is kind of the position. It's like hate the sin, not the sinner, right? And so that's the position that I've taken with the police, with the carceral system writ large, or the criminal legal system. And so, Brother Diego, what I mean by good cop is that not them being a cop is good, but that they are themselves a person who happens to be a cop is a good person. So that's what I mean by that, because I think that policing, because of the culture of policing and its roots and all that kind of stuff, it is, in my opinion, a system cannot be redeemed. However, the people in the system can be. And I always want to separate the people from the system, because abolition is rooted in each and every one of our humanity. And that's important to me, that we make sure that we stay true to that principle. Go ahead, Marco.
Yes, the only thing that I knew about abolitionists was pretty much Frederick Douglass, slavery, plantations, and things of that nature. I was in a discussion in the Twin Cities, and we began to talk about abolitionism. And what we basically gathered was that abolition work is like having quality childcare. We began to stretch the idea of what it is. It's having just laws and bills that benefit the people. Now, so I would challenge people to kind of stretch the idea of what an abolitionist is, because, when we think about it today, we often think of it in an ancient term versus what does it look like in 2022. Now, my question is, now you as a as an attorney, you found yourself in prison. Now, my question to you is, being a person that studied the law and found a lot of faith in its systems, how did your faith shift in the legal justice systems of today?
So that is the thing. I had to, my identity was wrapped up in the legitimacy of the criminal legal system, right? As an attorney, because if the system is illegitimate, then that means I'm illegitimate as an officer of the court, right? So for me, when I went through that process, I had to figure out who Avalon was. Like, I didn't even know who I was anymore. I needed to go back to basics and rebuild and rediscover who I was, because I had so much faith, because law school taught me that. Law school didn't teach me the truth about what was going on with the carceral system. Like, I didn't learn that in law school. Even as a practicing attorney, none of those things were brought to my attention. And so my faith in the system was my identity was rooted in that faith in the system. And so I had to relearn and rediscover who I was, knowing that the system was illegitimate, and that it really isn't designed to do more than what it does now. And we just got to kind of name that. And it's uncomfortable and it doesn't feel good, because we want to feel safe. But when you think about, to get back to your statement, Marco, when you think about when you felt safest, when you actually think about that, that's when you weren't hungry, you felt loved, you felt you had a place that you were staying at. Like, it was your environment is what created that safety, and that environment included people, right? And so we have to get back to where we're saying, okay, what is safety? And things like that. And so, Karen, I see you put a direct message. I did not plead guilty to any, I fought my case. I took my case to trial, and fought it all the way up to the Supreme Court. So no, I did not plead guilty to anything. My co-defendant pled guilty to one count of wire fraud, but I did not. So when we think about abolition is not the absence. I love how Angela Davis talks about it. Abolition is not the absence of something, it is the presence of something different. And so abolition is about building while we dismantle the current systems. So any other questions?
Sorry, I had connection issues.
Avalon, thank you so much. This has been a rich discussion, and I would imagine that we could keep talking for another hour or till the end of the day today. We would love to have you come back again, if you were so amenable, maybe even at some point when we could come in person and gather and break some bread together. But I think this is such an important topic, and so rich. And thank you for sharing your story with us. Thank you for all that you bring to this. I keep thinking back to Audrey at the beginning, at the top of the hour, and then you also talked about your journeys in terms of your faith. And I keep thinking about, I had the privilege a number of years ago when I was a student at CTS, I took a course with Reverend Jeremiah Wright on prophetic leadership. And he said, your theology informs your anthropology, informs your sociology, right? And so what it is that we say and understand about God and who is God determines what we think about our fellow human beings, and that determines how we set up society. And that just resonates in everything that you've been saying today, and clearly undergirds your work and your life. And so I hope all of us are not only inspired, but equipped to take some action and to think about, what is our role in working towards the society that we really want to build together. So thank you. Friends, I just have a couple of Quick announcements. As you know, every week we support our students by giving away a Starbucks gift card. This week's recipient is Haley Hudler. Haley, congratulations to you. I know you just successfully defended your master's thesis, so this will be a congratulatory beverage for you. Enjoy your Starbucks gift card. Watch your email. Friends, next week we welcome CTS alumnus Dr. Danielle Bruhuro. She'll be giving a CTS open house lecture. That lecture is titled Giving Esther CPR, Sexism in the Black Lives Matter Movement and Esther's Moral Injury. The following week will be our second spring convocation featuring Reverend Dr. Stephanie Buchanan Crowder. So we have 2 more amazing weeks coming up. The same link that brought you here today will bring you back to those upcoming events. I hope you will join us. Again, Avalon, thank you. Friends, it's so good to see you. Peace and blessings to everyone. Be well. Bye.
Peace and positivity. Thank you so much.